Okay, welcome back to another week of The Explorer. This week we are aiming to finish as much as we can, so we'll see if we can get some chapters done. First chapter is called Tarantulas. By the time Fred got back, the others were awake and furious and eating. It's difficult to look angry and chew at the same time, so they put down their bananas to glare at him. "Where were you?" asked Lila. "We thought he might have been cutting off your fingers," said Con. Fred explained about the trap, about the statues, and proffered the berries as a peace offering. By the time they'd finished spitting out the berries, and Max had finished miming being sick on Fred's shoes, Con and Lila had stopped glaring quite so ferociously. Lila offered him 3/4 of a banana. "We found them, over there. There's a tree behind the cluster of stones, where the earth shows through. There were 5, but we only took 3, in case they belonged to..." She gestured with her head up towards the statues. "Him." The bananas were a little green, but Fred preferred them that way. He ate as slowly as he could, but it was difficult. Bananas were very rare at home. It tasted of comfort. A light thumping echoed across the city square. It was the Explorer stomping down the centre of the citadel, heading in their direction. They frantically began tidying themselves, Con raking her hair with her fingers, Lila straightening back his fur. Max licked his forearms like a cat. At that point, several things happened at once. The Explorer came closer. He didn't, in fact, seem to be looking at them. He seemed lost in thought, staring up towards the canopy as he walked. A rustling made Fred look away, down at the ground. And a snake had reared up suddenly from behind a fallen branch. It stood straight up like the periscope on a submarine. It was violent green with a whitish belly. Its eyes were red. Fred froze. Fred gave a hiss and gestured to the others. They froze. "Don't panic," whispered Lila. "Snakes don't attack, remember?" Fred backed away. It came up over the trunk, its neck still a stalk, heading towards him. It didn't seem to like him staring. You tell it's been a weekend. "I think the snake might not know that," whispered Fred. The snake started to glide along the log towards them. Fred's breath halted in the middle of his throat. He stared around wildly for a stick. The Explorer walked straight past them, chewing on a stick with fierce intent. Without pausing in his stride, without seeming to take aim, he pulled a rock from his pocket and threw it at the snake. It cut through the air and struck the snake in the neck. The snake slumped to the ground. The Explorer kept walking. He didn't look back. His eyes had returned to the canopy overhead. Fred stared at Lila, at Con, and saw his own shock reflected back twice over. "Where did he learn to do that?" whispered Lila. "And why?" whispered Con. "I thought he'd rather we were all dead. It'd be more convenient for him." "Don't you say that," said Max. "You can't." His face was full of righteous fury. "He killed the snake for us, and he's mine." The Explorer stopped walking. His head whipped round to look at them. Con's mouth snapped shut, and she backed behind Fred, but the man's eyes were on Max. The Explorer strode back towards them. He bent, picked up the limp body of the snake, and thrust it into his pocket. His voice was sharp, but without gentleness. "I have no wish to have it on my conscience if you die. Have none of you any idea what you do if you see a snake?" "No," said Fred. That should have been fairly clear, he thought. The Explorer sighed. "For future reference, walk away backwards as fast as you can. Don't run, and hum as you go." "You want us to serenade a snake?" said Con. "Why?" "They don't like the vibration. Or, if you can kill it, it makes a reasonable dinner. If you really plan to make the journey to Manaus, you should know that. There are a great many things you need to know how to do. Can you fish?" "No," said Fred. "Not really." "Can you hunt?" "No," said Lila. "Can you set traps? Any of you, except Fred, who should know now." "No," said Con. "Why would we be able to? I live with a great aunt. She doesn't trap anything except dust. And mice, but she doesn't heed them." Lila grinned at her, the wonky tooth shining conspiratorially. "I see. The explorer drew in a breath, a heave of air that seemed to cement a decision. Right then, come with me. Just Con, said Lila, or all of us? All of you, even Fred, despite his idiocy. His eyes were hard. Even the miniature cataclysm in the cardigan. He means you, Max, said Con. I've found a nest, said the explorer, and I will share it with you. But I want to be clear. This is the only help I will give you. I have no time to waste on children. A nest of what? Said Lila. She scooped Backer up and settled him into her arms. He grasped hold of her upper arm, rested his nose in the crook of her elbow. You'll see. You'll see, Fred thought as they marched in single file behind the explorer, half running to keep up. You'll see were not reassuring words when spoken by someone whose fur coat still had the feet and faces attached. The nest, when they reached it, sticky with sweat and their hair full of twigs, did not look as Fred had expected. It was a hole in the ground. In fact, it was barely even that. The ground was covered in dry leaves and the hole was almost invisible. What's in there? Asked Fred. He wondered if it might be mice. Did mice dig burrows? He wasn't sure how he would feel about eating a mouse. Tarantulas, said the explorer. Oh. Mice suddenly sound much more appetising, thought Fred. They're delicious. They taste like shrimp cocktail. The explorer looked at Con, whose mouth was open. Do you have a plan for your face, or are you going to keep it like that? You don't actually eat tarantulas, asked Con. Do they attack sloths? Asked Lila. Backer peered out from behind her elbow. We get to eat spiders, said Max. The three sentences were spoken very differently, Fred thought. Disgust, cautious interest, sheer unholy joy. He said nothing, only knelt down to stare more closely at the hole. Yes, you toast them over the fire like crumpets. But are they poisonous? Asked Lila. I am not eating a tarantula, said Con. As you wish, the explorer shrugged. If you plan to walk to Manaus, the day will come when you'll be glad of knowing how. Right, we need some long twigs. I'm not eating one, said Con. That shouldn't be a shocking position to take. She turned to Lila and Fred for confirmation. That's normal. I want to try it, said Fred. Why on earth? Because I don't want us to starve on the walk to Manaus. What else are we going to eat? And what if it's good? Lila's face was interested. What are you thinking the chances it will be, percentage-wise? Low, said Con. Really disgustingly low. Who wants to go first? Asked the explorer. There was a glimmer in his eyes. Fred didn't trust him. Fred looked down the hole. He thought he saw a shadow move inside it. His stomach rumbled. I will, he said. Fine. The explorer smiled. It was not an easy smile. There was something wolfish about it. It's very simple. Take a stick and jab it in the hole. The tarantula will come out to see what's happening. Fred crouched over the hole and shook the tip of his stick backwards and forwards over the tarantula nest. You have officially crossed the line between brave and a medical condition, said Con. It can take a while, so don't give up, said the explorer. It's a good season for tarantulas. They should be meaty. He's mad, whispered Con to Lila. We're alone in a jungle with an actual real-life madman. Fred kept shaking his stick. Nothing happened. Con visibly relaxed. It's empty, she said. Thank goodness it's empty. 4 legs, jointed, thin and hairy, emerged from the nest. Fred froze. Keep going, barked the explorer. Move the stick backwards, lure it out. The spider that emerged was as big as Fred's palm and light brown. It's a female, said the explorer. The males are black. His hand darted past Fred and he grasped hold of the tarantula around the middle. He held his fingers way back from the pincers, which waved irate at the air. Do you want to stroke it? He asked. Sloths, when anxious, make noises halfway between a sheep and a seagull. Backer let out a tiny, shrill bleat. Lila stepped back, her arm shielding the sloth's eyes. The honest answer, Fred thought, was no. It was a no loud enough to shake the foundations of the jungle. But the words that came out of his mouth were, which way do I stroke it? In the direction of the fur, from the head to the back end. Don't, Fred, said Con. She was standing with her back flat against a tree. She was pale under the dirt. He's angry at you, remember? He's trying to hurt you. The explorer's voice was dangerously mild. The bite of this species is no worse than a bee sting, he said. He held the tarantula very gently. My boy used to... And then he stopped, shook himself and said, I knew a child once who had one as a pet. It got tame enough to sit in his lap while he ate. Fred glanced at the explorer, but his face was impassive. He laid his finger along the tarantula. It was unexpectedly soft and quivered against his touch. Now, said the explorer, pulling a knife from his pocket, suddenly very brisk, you slice along the back, from the neck, here, so it feels no pain, like this, but don't cut off the head. He cut across the spider's neck, and then you wrap it in leaves. He dropped the spider onto a large leaf and handed it to Lila, who shuddered but held it in both hands. Now you tie it with grass, as if it was a parcel. Yes, good. There's another nest east of here. Remember, you can tell a tarantula hole from the opening, shallow at the front, and then a sudden dip into a tunnel. The journey to Manaus takes you through rocky terrain. You'll be able to find them quite easily. I once went a whole month eating nothing but spiders and bananas. I had terrible yellow diarrhea, but I survived. He set off through the jungle without glancing behind him. Fred looked down at his hands. They smelt very slightly acidic. By the time they caught up with him, the explorer was leaning over another hole, sweeping black leaves and plants with his caiman skin shoe. The hole was significantly larger. Now, this one you have wrapped up like a birthday present is a common tarantula, but this hole, he prodded it with a stick, is different. This is the hole of a Goliath tarantula. He glanced pointedly at Con's hair. The Goliath tarantula has hairs on its rump, which it sheds if it feels threatened. And God knows I'd feel threatened if faced with a bunch of children. The hairs sting if they get on your skin, like nettles, but far worse. Do you understand? Yes. Good. Never mix up your tarantulas if you're planning to stroke them. It seemed sensible advice, Fred thought, as if useful only in very rare circumstances. Are they the ones they call bird-eaters? Asked Lila. Exactly, said the explorer, looking down at her with something like approval, although they rarely eat birds, mostly toads and worms and the occasional rat. They didn't need to tempt out the Goliath tarantula. As Fred leant forward to peer into the hole, the front legs emerged. He stepped back, fast. 4 more legs followed, and a great round body covered in thick hair. Con retched. Max squealed with delight. Lila stepped in front of her brother, pushing him behind her. She clutched back more tightly. The spider was as big as Max's face. It moved slowly towards Max's ankles. As calmly as if he was tying a shoelace, the explorer reached round, pressed the spider to the ground with a stick, and gathered up the legs in the air. Hand me some leaves, one of you, and watch your feet, there'll be more. By late afternoon they had 6 tarantulas. They took them home to their fire, and Lila laid them neatly in a row. Good. Now, you toast them on the sticks until all the hairs burn off, said the explorer. They'll start giving off a squeaking noise. It's the hot air escaping from the space between the leg joints. That's a sign they're done. You can eat all of it, including the face. The face, said Con weakly. The explorer laughed. He picked up 2 of the parcels, leaving them 4. You're on your own now, he said. Don't disturb me again, or I'll serve your eyeballs to the caiman like olives at a cocktail party. They stared at the bulk of his retreating back as he strode into the jungle. Fred speared his tarantula on a stick and held it over the fire, watching it turn dark brown in the flames. Lila toasted Max's for him. Con's lay still in its parcel. She refused to look at it. It's a spider, she kept whistling. After 10 minutes, the spiders began to whistle like the sound of a tea kettle. Fred gathered all his courage together. He pulled the tarantula, silly dog, off the stick. It was hot and crispy, but looked unambiguously spidery. He held his nose and bit a leg off. He was astonished. They tasted fish-like and salty, like the sea. He took another, larger bite. It's not bad, he said. Con stared at him, incredulous. You're eating spiders. You do realise that? Max took a bite of his. It is very delicious, he said. Can I eat yours if you're not having it? No, said Con. Try a leg of mine, said Fred. The spider made him feel more awake. He could imagine the journey home, really imagine it for the first time, walking by day and eating spiders and whatever fruit they could find each night. He thought of his father meeting them at the dock in Portsmouth, bending to pull Fred into his arms. He shook himself and tried to push the thought away. It tastes of fishy chicken, said Lila. Really, truly, it's not bad. Promise it's not a trick? Promise. Try mine. Fred burnt his. Lila held out a spider leg. Very gingerly, Con took the leg from Lila. She sniffed it. It doesn't smell of anything, just the fire, she said suspiciously. She closed her eyes and bit the tip of the foot. Her eyes opened in surprise. It's not terrible, she said. It tastes almost like food. I love them. Max spoke with half a spider leg hanging out of his mouth. They should sell them at the pantomime with ice creams. And that is the end of our chapter Tarantulas. So we'll go on to the next one. Okay, the next chapter is called Twice Fried Oiseau Spectacle. That night, Fred, Con and Lila formed a conclave. They sat in a tight circle round the fire, their heads close together, planning in whispers. Max laid his back on the stones and decorated himself with a small clover-like plant growing at his feet. Bacchus sat on Lila's lap, watching with careful eyes. I think we should cook something for him, said Lila, gesturing with her chin towards the statues and vines. Then he might help us again. Yes, said Con. Men love food. No, I don't want him to eat my ears, said Max. He was joking, Max, said Lila. We hope, muttered Con, but for once she said it under her breath. That sounds great, but we can't really cook, said Fred. You don't get to have an opinion, said Con haughtily. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have to worry about him. Anyway, good cooking is simply paying attention and taking your time. She spoke as if reciting. I like that. Who told you that? Asked Lila. My gym teacher. Are gym teachers famous for being good cooks? Asked Fred. He scratched a mosquito bite which began to bleed. No, and she was a terrible gym teacher too. She made us walk around the gym pretending to be riding a horse. She said it would be good for our self-confidence. Was it? What do you think? Lila grinned. We still have those berries, she said. We could roast them for him with some leftover bird. They looked at the bird. It had dried out a little in the sun. It smells very, very leftover, said Con. At home, said Lila, we have refried beans from the day before. Mama makes them with spices. It's delicious. Her smile faded a little at the word Mama. Con looked for a second at Lila, then briskly got up to her feet. I'll find a stone we can use for a frying pan, she said. We could call it Twice Fried Bird Spectacular, said Lila. Twice Fried Oiseau Spectacle, said Con. That's French. Posh food is always in French. A sudden sound made them stop talking. From the far side of the square, in among the vines, came a roaring. It sounded like a bear, or a tiger, or an engine, or a human in pain. Lila reached for back with her shoulder. Is that him? The sound stopped as suddenly as it began. Maybe he goes there to scream, to roar? Maybe that's what he's doing, asked Con. I'd quite like a room I can scream in. They sat in silence for many minutes, but the noise didn't come again. They returned to the food. The vulture approached. It sat on Max's shoe and watched balefully as they cooked, apparently resenting that they hadn't offered him any. I didn't know vultures could look so much like ants, said Con. When the explorer finally reappeared, though, he seemed to have forgotten when they were there. He looked briefly startled, then nodded at them, as if to commuters sharing a train, and was turning away without a word when Max ran after him, weaving in and out of the young shoots growing up between the stones of the city floor. Come back, said Max. It was an order, not a request. We cooked you food. The explorer looked surprised. What? Oh, that's very generous, but I won't thank you. You have to. We made it specially. The explorer crouched down in front of Max. I applaud your decision to move commandingly through the world, but you have vulture poo in your hair, which dents your gravitas. Please, said Lila. She had moved silently across the square, approaching him as you would a wild animal. Bacca looked out through Lila's hair. "Please just try it." She held out a leaf, on which was laid some of the birds and some roasted berries. They tried to make it look as much like a restaurant plate as possible. Due to an accident involving the vulture at Max's elbow, the meat was more covered in ash than any of them had planned. But Fred thought you could still make out what it was supposed to be. "It's twice fried wazoo," said Max. "It's special." "Well, thank you," said the explorer. He took a bite, then gave an exclamation and spat it into the bush. "Good heavens, that tastes like being punched in a graveyard." Oh, sorry," said Lila, her voice very small. "We wanted to do something you'd like, so we—" "Please don't cut off our ears," said Max. "No, I apologise. It was a kind thought." The explorer touched the ring on his little finger. "I'd rather forgotten how kind children could be." Then he shook his head so hard that his shock of hair flicked sweat onto the stones. He turned, giving a half bow. "You'll forgive me, I must light the fire before dark." He paced to the far side of the square, close to his hammock, and knelt among the branches. It took him less than a minute to get the sparking flames from the wood. He moved so fast and with so much assurance it was impossible to follow his hands. He took a fish from his pocket and set it on a three-cornered spit, and the vulture kept close to his ankles. He sat down and squatted by the fire. Fred watched from a corner of his eyes while the others grimly attempted to chew the twice-burnt bird. The explorer sat, his elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. "Do you think he's all right?" Fred whispered. "He looks, I don't know, sad?" Con looked over. "He kills snakes with rocks. That kind of person doesn't get sad." As they spoke, the explorer rose and crossed to a pile of coconuts at the foot of the tree. Each had been sliced open at the top and then had the lid replaced. The explorer drank deeply from one, threw away the shell and picked up another. After his third, he turned suddenly to the children. "Do you drink?" he called across the square. "Depends what sort of drinking," said Con. "Cachaça, my own version. Try some." They crossed the square warily, keeping a close eye on the vulture. Lila slipped Bacca down in front of her sweater and laid a protective hand on his head and the other on Max's shoulder. They hovered, the four of them, on the edge of the light cast by the fire. Fred bent his knees to sit, but none of the others did, so he tried to make it look as if he was testing his joints. "Sit down, boy," said the explorer. "All of you. Do you not know what God gave you bottoms for? Here, drink this." "What is it?" said Fred. "Sugar cane, coconut milk, and some other things. Herbs." "What kind of herbs?" said Lila. "Have you ever drunk anything that tastes like it will either kill you or make you immortal? That's this." Fred took a mouthful, then doubled over coughing. It tasted of nothing really, only hot and burning. It made his eyes and nose stream. "More?" said the explorer. "No, thank you. It tastes too much like being electrocuted." The explorer laughed. The laugh had thorns on it. "You'll like it better when you're older." Con sniffed the liquid. "Is it alcohol?" The explorer shrugged. "Technically, yes, but not the way you're thinking. It doesn't taste like wine or have the same effect." Con shook her head. Lila, to Fred's surprise, reached for the coconut. "Just so I know, I need to experiment if I'm going to be a scientist." She drank. Bacca tried to drink too, and had to have his upper body fished out of the coconut. Lila shook her head vehemently. "It tastes like puking the wrong way round." The explorer grunted. "Ungrateful baggage." He took the fish from the spike, laid it on the stone, sliced it down the middle and cut out 4 chunks from its flesh. "Eat this. Better that than a horrendous nightmare of bird you concocted." The fish was hot and rich. It was unexpectedly meaty in flavour, smoky and bold. Fred ate his in 2 bites and looked hopefully at what was left. "Piranha," said the explorer. "The older they are when you catch them, the more they taste like chicken." The explorer seemed surprisingly disposed to talk. He made a sweeping gesture with his hand, hit the vulture in the chest and sloshed some of the coconut's liquid over the bird. "Tell me, what do you think of this?" "The vulture?" asked Con doubtfully. Her voice took on the tone that voices take when asked to comment on a newborn baby, when that baby is self-evidently horrifyingly ugly. "It's nice. It smells very original. Of the city, of the jungle. They call it the green hell. Did you know that?" Fred stared at the vast expanse of stone, at the green ceiling high, high ahead. They called the jungle the Green Hell because it's lacking in grand pianos. Men, and when I say men I mean idiots, used to come out here with pianos on the back of elephants. And they used to be angry when the teacups broke in storms. He grunted. But if you're willing to have a roguish, roughish, wildish kind of life, I find it closer to heaven than to hell. The explorer began to drink from another coconut shell. His sighed and his eyes became misty. There's a lot written about love at first sight, but what is love on first sight but recognition? It's an instant knowledge that this is the person who will make your heart larger. A lover, a child. The same applies to places. It's why I wanted to seek them out. It's why they need protecting. He stared, his eyes a little uneven, at Fred. Fred stared at the fire, avoiding his gaze. There was a quality in this place that worked like flint on his insides. It was the light, the vastness of it, and the sun and the green. He could tell why other people might feel it was too green, too loud, too endless, too much. But for him, it felt like a trumpet call to a part of him he had not known existed. Fred's face must have shown something he was thinking. The explorer hammered his coconut onto the ground. I can tell, I can see that you're falling in love with this place. How do you not yet see why it must be a secret? How do you not see how mad it would be to gamble with the beauty of such a secret? Fred hesitated. He couldn't keep it a secret. It was impossible. The world deserved to know about this much beauty. The headmaster would call an assembly and call him a hero. But he'd never seen anyone so utterly sure of anything as the man in front of him. You don't understand, said the explorer under his breath. Speech is dangerous. Some of the most interesting things I've said I later realised I didn't have the right to. Then, abruptly, he changed tack. He became brisk. You said you followed my map. Does that mean you encountered the bees? Yes, said Lila. We borrowed some of their honey. She explained how Max had seen the monkeys and the ants. The explorer nodded. I used to do the same. Bees make good allies. I used to get the tobacco pouches made specially by a man in Burlington Arcade. I spent a lot of time in those parts of the jungle, but it doesn't do to be without tobacco for too long, and you can't carry too much on your person without attracting attention from jaguars. I have tobacco pouches stationed all across that sweep of the river. By the way, did you meet my dolphins? Yes, said Fred. We didn't know they were yours. The explorer hiccuped. They're good creatures, dolphins, his voice tripping over himself. I used to feed them sardines. I worry it was a mistake, though. They trust too easily. It's a mistake to trust too easily. And then there was the fire, a bad one, said Lila. And so we came here. We thought it was the least mad risk. That's exactly it. The explorer was becoming emphatic. He emphasised some of the cachaça over Fred's knees. Fred tried not to laugh. Take risks, said the explorer. That's the thing to do. Get to know what fear feels like. Get to know how to manoeuvre around it. But... He paused to drink again. But, asked Lila. But make sure the risks you take aren't to impress someone else. Fred frowned. It sounded like the thing the masters said at school. That's the way people end up with jaguars chewing at their collarbones and no one to love them for it. He wiped his eyes and stared at them. Risk, jaguars. Noted, said Com. I took a risk once. I loved someone. 2 people. A woman, and we had a child. Did you know? We didn't know, said Lila gently. She exchanged a glance with Fred. I lost that gamble. I lost them. He set down the coconut and closed his eyes in a long, exhausted blink. But I'm glad to have made the wager. Did you? Began Lila. I loved like I was unhinged, he said. His voice was now rough. I came at love like a child making up arms. I worked out how to blink her name in Morse code. He gave a drunken grunt of laughter. I was very young, he said. People don't tell you that love is so terrifying. It's less like rainbows and butterflies and more like jumping on the back of a moving dragon. Fred hesitated, wordless, but wanting to say something that would be large enough to meet the pain in the man's face. Before he could say anything, the explorer drank again, finishing the coconut in 2 immense gulps. Do you all do nothing but stare? I thought children gambled and frolicked. Do some frolicking. Framble! Fred looked at the others. He had no idea how to gamble. He believed it involved running in circles with your arms in the air and lifting your knees as high as they would go, which was not, he thought, something that seemed sensible under the circumstances. I don't really think we're the frolicking sort, said Fred. Disappointing, said the explorer. Are you drunk? Asked Con. Of course not, he burped reproachfully. I'm just, perhaps the word is drunk. The jungle is a little more blurred than usual. I think that stuff must be strong, said Fred. That's impolite. I resent the implication. Sorry. Good, the explorer slurred. I like people best when they're silent or sorry. Do you need, began Lila, but he closed his eyes and turned away from them. My head aches. I can't look you in the voice. I shall sleep now. He lay down on the stone ground and closed his eyes. A noise like a motor car began to come from somewhere deep within his chest. Moving on to the tips of their toes, the children returned to their own fire. As the dark spread across the swarm of mosquitoes appeared, one of them had caught inside Fred's nose and bit his nostril. Is there a way to get rid of mosquitoes? Asked Con. I think smoking sometimes keeps them away. Some of the men my parents work with do it. I heard smoking makes you less hungry, said Con. You can try, said Fred, scratching his nose. He rolled up leaves. Lila filled them with shredded grass and lichen, and Con lit them. Is this like real smoking? Gasped Lila. Hot, acrid smoke billowed in Fred's face. I've never tried. Does smoking taste a bit like a garden dyed in your face? I think so, said Con, from the smell. Then I suppose yes. He discreetly put his cigarette out in a big, empty snail shell. It didn't seem worth the feeling that his tongue was about to drop out of his mouth. Fred looked at the two girls, who were both spitting disgustedly into the fire. He'd never really known any girls his own age, but both Lila and Con could spit as far as any boy in school. Their spit had commitment, an impact. He saw them grin at each other in the firelight. It was a peculiar night that night. Fred's thoughts kept returning to the man lying asleep by the fire on the other side of the ruined city square. The explorer was so alone, living with only the green and the birds and the endless jungle. But, Fred thought, it wasn't as if he was so much less alone himself. The thought made him shiver. He felt something touch his ankle. He jerked away, thinking of tarantulas, but it was a hand. Con's hand, gripping his ankle in her sleep. He hesitated. Then he reached down and pressed his thumb on hers. He hoped the touch said, We'll be all right. We will all be all right. It was hard to be specific with thumbs. But it must have worked a little, because she grew still, and her breathing became heavy and regular. Lila muttered in her sleep. Bacca lay entangled in her long dark hair. Fred looked up at the vine roof above them, scanning it for snakes, and then, his flint tight in his palm, he allowed himself to close his eyes. And that is our chapters done for today. Fantastic. Right. I hope you all enjoy that and answer the questions that are coming up in a second. Bye.